Take a person, take a story, take you on a journey. It's your take.
I confess to being a huge admirer of today's Your Take guest. I've seen him and his band perform on 3 occasions. He's a gifted singer-songwriter from Liverpool. Since his debut album, Life in Easy Steps, in 2013, he's being acclaimed as one of the great new voices in Americana, country, and folk music. He's been endorsed by Whispering Bob Harris, winning the inaugural Emerging Artist Award from the man himself in 2016. He also performed on BBC 4's Old Grey Whistle Test for one night only. In 2018, my guest released his second studio album, I'll Make the Most of My Sins, and most recently worked with the award-winning producer Ethan Johns on his third album, In This Town You're Owned. Today on Your Take, I speak with musician Robert Vincent. We talk about growing up in Liverpool, his discovery of roots and Americana music, life as a musician, and touring on the road with the likes of Elvis Costello, Robert Plant, Paul Carrack, and Duane Eddy. Good morning, a very warm welcome and very nice to see you.
And to see you as well. Thank you very much for having me. Great to be here.
No, thank you kindly. From the offset, when we set up the channel, which was probably around about 8-9 months ago, you were one of the first names that I wanted to approach.
Yeah.
Mainly because I love your songs. I love the fact that you're a storyteller. I want to discuss how you kind of discovered roots music and your love for it, and obviously talk about your career as a musician, a professional musician. Mm-hmm. But initially, I kind of wanted to go back to the very roots where it all kind of began, your upbringing. You were born in the coastal town of Crosby on the Merseyside. Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask when you were born, slip of the tongue. What are your kind of earliest memories of growing up in the Northwest?
I'm born in Crosby. Always lived here pretty much. I mean, obviously I've lived around different parts of Liverpool, but Crosby is quite an inspirational place because it's right. You know, you've got the sea right there, which is very important to me. I kind of, you know, if I go to places like Nashville, you know, a week or two is long enough because I get a bit landlocked. You know what I mean? I need to be by the sea. So the sea is a really important thing.
Yeah.
And also it is like kind of metaphorically, but physically it is, because it was part of the reason why Liverpool became like a bit of a hotspot really for country and Americana and blues and jazz and all of these different things, because it was a way of the sailors bringing back records from America in the 50s. You know, they used to bring back lots of different you know, albums that no one had access to here. You know, like you hear the stories about the Rolling Stones with the same thing, you know, that, you know, Mick and Keith would kind of get hold of these, or it was Keith, I think, that used to get hold of all of these different records, you know, blues records. And it was the same in Liverpool, and I think that's why a lot of the musicians had access to great music. And I think it really accelerated things for the musicians in Liverpool. Mm. So then very quickly you had like country bars and blues bars, and even the Cavern was a jazz club, you know, before it became the kind of Mersey beat hub. So Liverpool's always had that connection with the sea and music, and just that kind of, you know, obviously the influx of Irish. So you had all of those melting pot of all of these different musical influences that were creating the scene to come, you know. So the 50s and the 60s, obviously it's inescapable about the Beatles. I just started watching the Get Back thing this morning, actually, as I was kind of gearing up to speaking to you, and I just thought, you know, I was just watching it, I was just thinking, the you know, in your mind the Beatles are just these old guys, but you see them in their youth, and I understand the humor, and and you can see it in them. You can see the kind of the upbringing in them with the music, the similar music that I brought up with by my dad. My dad's a similar age, and he was always into Roy Orbison and Elvis and Stones, but also a lot of country as well. So there was a lot of country that my dad listened to. So it was either on in the house or the car or something. There was always, my dad was always, and still is always, kind of listening to different stuff, to different things. So the music's always been a real thing in the house, and obviously in being from Liverpool, it's just always there anyway. It's always a very present thing. I can't say when exactly it was that I started listening to music, but I always knew that it was a thing. It was always a thing for me as a kid. It was always there's a little place just further up the coast called Formby. From here, it's about 5 miles, and you can get the train and you walk up this big road, and it's where all the football players live. There are all these big houses, and apparently I said to me mum, even when I was about 3, when I'm a rich rock star, I'm going to buy you one of those big houses. So it's always been there. I don't know. I'm still waiting. She's still waiting for the house, like, you know what I mean? It hasn't happened yet.
I love the fact that you've kind of already spoken about the history of music, and you're kind of right. The dots just connect up. You take a band like the Beatles and you kind of trace the history.
Yeah.
It all stems back from them kind of importing these records from the USA, from people like Big Bill Brunsey to Chuck Berry, that music wasn't kind of accessible as it was, say, like now. You were sort of inundated with music on iTunes and Spotify. It's easier to access music. The thing I was particularly interested in was why for you was kind of Americana and kind of roots music and country. Why were you so kind of like into that? What was it about kind of those artists, those stories, that music?
I think it's just the way that what we said. It's like the storytelling, isn't it? It's the stories behind the songs. It's all of these. You can say a lot of things in a country song, because with a country song, because it's 3 chords and the truth, the music sounds very disarming, but the lyrics can say whatever you want. And I think there's a kind of lulling you into the song with the music, and the kind of beautiful way that country songs and Americana songs do that, and folk songs in general. And then you get deeper into the lyrics, and I think that's what I've always loved about it, is that there's just an immediacy about it that instantly kind of grabs you, and I've never really understood why I love it either. It's just always been something that it's always been a form of music that I've loved, and when I hear people singing it, it really speaks to me. And we talk about Americana music, but and we can have the discussion about what it is and how and why people from this country like it and play it. But even there, there's links right from that Get Back that I was watching this morning, with the fact that Glyn Johns, who's Ethan's dad, obviously, who produced my last record, he's in there, he's in the room with them. Now, whether you like to believe it or not, they're playing songs, that are, I think, back in the USSR, I think comes out in that in later on in the thing. But there's songs that are influenced by American artists. So that's Americana in a way. They were doing that then as well, because it's American influenced sounding music. And Glyn Johns is there. And then Ethan, when he grows up, he then starts working with some of the most, influential Americana artists like Ryan Adams and Ray LaMontagne and Kings of Leon and all this type of thing. And the circle continues, and it seems to be an ongoing thing with the UK and the US, that we send over folk music, they kind of do their thing with it and send it back, and it just seems to be this kind of constant juggling act between the two countries. And I think that's what makes it great. But the thing that always stays is the storytelling. It's the troubadour instinct to tell that story and to keep a story alive. And and that's what I love about it, because I love lyrics. So for me, it gives me a great platform to be able to do that.
You've already painted a portrait of your early upbringing, loving music from an early age, for your dad's influence here in these kind of roots records from country to kind of rock and roll, blues, and so on.
Yeah.
And I kind of didn't want to state the obvious, but the Beatles, Liverpool, the connection, you know, they are the kind of creme de la creme as well.
Mm-hmm.
But from having that passion for music, listening to music, when did you start making the transition from being the listener to writing your own material and learning and playing guitar? And how did that transition come about? And then the realization maybe sinking in that, oh, I'm actually good at this. Why don't I form a band or try and make it in the music business?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I've always got imposter syndrome. I always feel like as if I'm never good enough for any of this. And I suppose that's what makes me trying to keeping writing songs. But I genuinely, that's the way I feel. But I've always felt like compelled to write lyrics. I was doing it when I was a kid in school. So I would always write little stories. And my mum still got a bunch of papers of things that I've written when I was a kid. And then writing with lyrics became the main thing for me. And I didn't think I picked up a guitar to write a song until I was like maybe 14 or 15. But before that, I'd been writing lyrics. And then I started writing a few little bits and pieces of songs. But also just being like in all of the kind of initial bands that I had, like through from school bands with mates to then finding other musicians outside of school and in Liverpool. I suppose I became like a lyricist and a singer really, and then it just became. So I suppose maybe I don't know. It became like a need to be able to write my own songs and be self-sufficient really, because like bands are really hard to keep together and people often leave and there's often people have different ideas and things like that. And so I just got to the point where in the end I had to become self-sufficient and start writing everything myself, music and lyrics, because I quite like the thing of throwing a guitar in a car and just driving off and going and doing a gig somewhere as well on my own. I don't mind that at all. I love that thing of being able to do that. So yeah, it started at a really early age, as I say, writing lyrics and then putting little bits and pieces of songs together. But it's an ever evolving thing for me. I don't know. I feel like I'm still massively learning on this through this whole kind of the routine of what I do as a writer. It never even now through the lockdown, it still surprises me how much I don't really know what I'm doing in terms of like I go through the fear of I can't write a song anymore. And then I mess around and I come up with a few ideas, and then before you know it, you've got like 10 songs, and then I go, "How did that happen again?" I still, and I suppose I'm very wary to even question it too much of how that process happens for me.
It's interesting you talk about the process, because we've had a few musicians be interviewed for Your Take, mainly guitarists, and my question has been like, about mastering the guitar and about their tone and so on. And their answer's normally always the same, a bit like what you've said. They said, you never master the guitar, you're always learning, which is kind of, I think, quite interesting. I wanted to kind of move on and talk about kind of your early musical career and kind of ask you when you started performing professionally as a musician, and talking about some of the early bands you were in, and also what the Liverpool music scene was like at that time.
Well, yeah, that's a really interesting question actually, because it does have a massive impact on how I wanted to write and how I wanted to express myself as a writer, because at that time, that kind of mid-90s time, was just filled with bands wanting to be Oasis, which I didn't dig really at all. I was more of a kind of Nirvana, Pearl Jam teenager rather than what was going on in this country. You know what I mean? I suppose I'd grown up listening to bands like Pink Floyd as well, and so all of those influences. But you had Blair and Blair and Oasis, and to me they just sounded like Blair sounded like early Pink Floyd to me, so I was already listening to that, so it was fine. I'd got all the Syd Barrett albums, so I didn't really need to listen to a band like Blair emulating that kind of early thing, and that's fine because there was a whole generation of people who wouldn't have got that, but I did because I was already listening to that stuff. And then you had Oasis, who sounded like Slade and the Beatles, which again are very much being introduced to by my brothers and things like that. So I listened to a lot of Pearl Jam and Nirvana and a lot of those kind of American bands. So then when I started getting into bands and everyone almost wanted to be like an Oasis tribute band, really, it was frustrating for me. I wanted to write songs that had this, and everything I seemed to write just had this kind of country lilt to it, and I couldn't. Everyone's kind of looking at me as if to say, what's that? You can't, we need big crunchy guitar chords, and I wasn't into it, so I had to endure that for a little while, and then it was kind of I was in a couple of bands that did okay. I was in one called Boa, I think, that we played in about 2004. We won a Battle of the Bands thing in Liverpool in the Cavern to go and play in Memphis. At it was the 2004 was the 50 years of rock and roll festival, so we got to go to Sun Studio, and we got to, they just recently reopened it again. I think somebody had just taken it over, and we got to go and record a track in there. And then they had this festival a couple of days later after we were in there recording, and they had you literally had everyone turn up. Scotty Moore turned up.
Wow, incredible.
DJ Fontaine, Sam the Sham, all these amazing kind of 50s artists, Isaac Hayes, all of these people who were like kind of Memphonians, and they so we got that for me was again a real kind of, I remember coming back from that trip and thinking, I just need to do the music that I watched all of these guys play this rock and roll and country, and obviously the history of Johnny Cash and Elvis and all of these different people that played in those places. It just really instilled in me that I needed to do what it is that I wanted to do, which was obviously country sound and music, and not be ashamed of it. And so I started writing a bunch of songs around about 2005. I think we went and played Glastonbury, and then the band split up, as they always do. Just as you start doing all the good bits, everyone gets too above the station, and then they all want to have side projects, But so so it fell apart, and I think about 2006 I just started writing a load of songs, and I think I probably wrote about 30 or 40 songs within a very small space of time, probably 2 or 3 months, and then I put a little band together called Night Parade, which was a very local band. And we just did our thing, and we kind of found our way. And it was the first time I'd really kind of steered the ship with a band, and that was great for a time. That was great, and that lasted till about 2010. And then I met a producer called Pete Smith, who had worked with. He'd done a lot of like kind of big singles in the 80s, like Mock Turtles, Can You Dig It, and like he'd worked with Sting on Dream of the Blue Turtle, and all of these different things. So he had all of these. He kind of pulled me to one side when we were in the studio doing this album with the band, and kind of said, "Look, if you ever want to do something yourself, give me a shout," And then again, as these things often do, the band kind of imploded, and I was looking around for something else. So I gave Pete a ring, and then we went in and did Life in Easy Steps. So it was a kind of through the noughties was a kind of gradual kind of growing of me becoming a songwriter and finding my own way, because as I say, and I'm not saying it flippantly, I always had that imposter syndrome of what am I doing here? Why am I standing in Sun Studio? You know what I mean? It's like, what am I doing here? This can't be right, So yeah, it was a real gradual, slow burn for me through that time up until about 2010, and then I found my kind of my own way being a singer-songwriter with Americana and country,
You mentioned the producer you met and the debut album. I think it's a nice point to talk about the first album, but I love the story you mentioned, this kind of progression and musical journey. And I'd imagine that the whole Memphis thing was kind of like a pilgrimage in a way, meeting some of those, they're just legends of music.
Yeah.
Going back to like 8 years, turning the clock back to 2013, I believe, the release of the debut album. How did that kind of record deal come about? And what was the experience like recording the first album? And did you feel, as it was the first one, did you feel there was kind of a lot of pressure to kind of make an impact from day one?
Yeah. What had happened was we'd met a guy who was a friend of the band in about 2009. He'd come along to a gig in London, and he wanted to back the band, and he wanted to support the band, and that meant like kind of financially as well. So he put a bit of money in, and we went into the studio. We did an album, and we did it with a couple of guys, but one of them was Pete Smith, who came along and kind of, I think he mixed the album in the end, and so when I did go off to do Life in Easy Steps, the thing is that when you got a producer like Pete Smith, he said to me, look, I really believe in what you're doing, but I need to put my own band around this whole thing and my own sound around this whole thing. And if you want to make this album, because I've been listening to Robert Plant and Alison Krauss, Raisin Sand, that album, that T-Bone Burnett sound.
Yeah.
And we just wanted this big fat low sound like that, that was big and warm. And he said, well, I need to get the players in. So that was the whole thing of me moving away from the band and becoming more of a solo artist. And there was a lot of pressure on it, because a lot of these guys, I'm still playing with Jim and Danny now. I still know James. James was the guitarist, James Warburn. He plays with the Pretenders and does a lot of his own things like the Rails, and great player, great musician, fantastic musician. And Danny Williams is a bass player who, he'd been in like Black Grape and all these different types of things. And he's from Manchester. He's a lovely guy. And Jim Kimbley, who has a lovely folk duo called the Kimbleys with his wife, and they're all very musical, and they've all been down that path as well. So he put this band around me that was just perfect, And we went into a rehearsal studio we were booked in for 5 days, but after about the third day, I think we'd nailed everything we needed to do, because they were just so good, and it was the first time that I'd played with musicians that really got my songs, and that was a big moment. And then I kind of started to feel a little bit more like, okay, maybe I am meant to be stood in this room, and it's okay for my songs are maybe they are cutting it, and it was nice. And then we went into the studio and recorded the album, but there was a lot of pressure on it, because we also put a lot of time and effort into it, to make it something. And there was a lot of follow-up, and we did a lot of PR and around it, and really tried to make as big a noise as possible, because at the time the Americana scene over here hadn't really kicked in. There was you had like Danny Wilson and Pete Bruntnell and people like this who had been doing the Americana scene for a while. Danny with Grand Drive, and Pete had always been, and Pete, strangely enough, had worked with Pete Smith as well. So Pete Bruntnell, I don't know whether you've ever heard of Pete Bruntnell. He's a fantastic singer-songwriter. You should check him out. If you haven't, you really need to check him out.
He'll be on my radar, yeah.
Yeah, and you should get him on for a chat. He's great. He's a good friend. And so I got introduced to him through Pete Smith. And Pete's been, I think him and Pete Smith did an album in 1995, 96, which was really critically acclaimed. And that was that first kind of thing of Americana kicking into the UK scene, but it hadn't really seemed to light any fires. It was just the few of those guys doing their own thing. So there was a lot of pressure on it, in the sense that I felt like as if I was kind of in that that wave, on the crest of that wave, trying to put this Americana thing across. And that was what I was always trying to do through that, that kind of 2000 to 2010. I was trying to get my own sound together, really, and put it out there. So this was it was a really big chance for me to do that. So there was a lot of pressure, but I think the album came out and it was really well received, which again, I didn't know I was going to be received at all, because there was no scene, if you like, there was no Americana scene like there is now, really, in a way. So it was an interesting time, but it was again, it was more good growth. It was a way of learning, learning the rights and the wrongs.
Seems interesting. You like recollections of recording that album. You say it was kind of a natural process, well rehearsed with great musicians. You knew your music, and then sort of incredibly, you released the album, and then all of a sudden, one of the great statesmen of music, who's almost like a musical Bible, an incredible broadcaster, endorses you, Whispering Bob Harris. You win the inaugural Whispering Bob Harris Emerging Artist Award.
Yeah.
What's it like being endorsed by somebody with that kind of musical pedigree? And do you think the acclaim from winning that award, did it help your music reach a kind of new and wider audience?
Yeah, definitely. Well, firstly, it's obviously, when someone like Bob Harris says he likes your songs, then you tend to, that's good, isn't it? It's nice. So like, that's always a good thing. And yeah, Bob's been amazing. I haven't seen him much over the last couple of years, obviously, but because he's had his health issues and stuff, and he's had to kind of really look after himself. But he's doing well, and he's great, and he does so much for artists like myself. I know he's really pushing a couple of other young kids, that are coming through, Lauren Housley, and there's a couple of guys that he's been really, and he never stops doing that, and that's I think he's always done that right from the start. I mean, Bowie and Elton John, he was like playing their records before anyone knew who they were, and so he is like, yeah, he's the man in that sense, and you listen and you sit up when he talks about someone. So that was great, and that kind of came a little bit later because the album came out. Well, the album ended up coming out in 2013, and then somehow the first album kind of seemed to kind of pass him by. And it was when I went. He came to Liverpool to do a Nashville in the round Bluebird style show with a bunch of artists like Beth Nielsen Chapman and Jim Lauderdale and all of these people, and fantastic writers, Kim Ritchie, all of these different people, and they were doing a show in the evening, and they picked a couple of musicians to play in the round with them. And but they said, if you send your tracks in, then the panel will have a listen to a track of each person. So they chose about 20 people, and each person, I think I was the penultimate or the last person to play, which obviously is the worst thing in the world, because I think I went through my whole catalogue of what song am I going to play, what song am I going to decide on to play. So you're like, oh, I'll do that one, and if you got like, you stood there for an hour and you're seeing everyone else play these great songs, and it's quite unnerving, really. But there's a song called All For You, which is on the second album, I'll Make the Most of My Sins, that I'd written about when my boy was born in 2012. And my mum always said it was her favorite song. So I thought, well, you just go with what your mum likes. So I played that song, and it's very urban, or, it's very like kind of Roy Orbison vibe, Everly's vibe. So I played that, and I think it just connected with Bob straight away. And we instantly hit it off as friends. In fact, before he could remember my name, he just kept calling me the Orbison guy, which I thought was in his beautiful, warm, rich voice that he's got, was like, really, again, it was lovely, because it was another full circle thing, because I'd loved Orbison growing up as well, because that had always been played in the house. So anyway, all of these links seem to be coming together, and then Bob really took me under his wing, and Trudy, his wife, really took me under the wing, and next thing he gave me that award, and then I was thrown into that Americana world then, and it was like their first award ceremony, and then there seemed to be a home for every, there seemed to be a place where I could latch onto and kind of play my music and get involved with. So in that sense, I suppose, I can't thank Bob enough for that, really, because it was really introduced me to a world that I wasn't part of. So it was great.
I want to continue with your connection and your closeness with Bob Harris, because you're invited onto BBC Four's Old Grey Whistle Test. They did a special television show called For One Night Only.
Yeah.
What are your memories from that performance? And again, do you believe that that performance kind of made a massive breakthrough in your career? And was that the first time you performed on a music television program?
Yeah. Firstly, first memories of the day is don't mess it up. It's live TV. Don't get this wrong, Vincent. In front of however many, I think it was one 1.5 million people tuned in. So it was my first real big like kind of live TV performance. Yeah, I think I'd done like other things, but they're all pre-recorded. So, but it was lovely when we got there. We went to the White City, the old White City BBC building.
Yeah.
Which again in itself is like steeped in history and all of that. It wasn't the original whistle test room that they used, but they made it look like that. So when we walked in, it just had this like kind of ramshackle kind of look on the walls, and it was, and then you saw the big Star Kicker neon sign hanging down, and the right, and it was just like, it was overwhelming. But we got there about 11 o'clock in the morning, and we had a rehearsal. So so we finished out the show at like something like just 10 to 12 in the evening. So they started the rehearsals with the last band that we're going to play. So we had to start the rehearsals, and then we got to stand and watch all of these great artists, doing their thing. Richard Thompson and Albert Lee.
He's a phenomenal player, isn't he? And such a steeped in it. He's played with everyone, hasn't he? From the Everlys to Jerry Lee Lewis.
Just unreal, and just such a lovely, unassuming bloke. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just a really nice bloke. At one point, the only time I heard him say anything, it was freezing. It was a cold day, and the only time I heard him say anything, he was just like, his fingers were a bit cold, and he was like, you can imagine and it was just a lovely day seeing all these people do their thing. Gary Newman was there, and who else? Oh, there was tons of people. It was just a fantastic day, and after a while, because you'd done the rehearsals and everything, it just you were in it, and it felt lovely. And Bob was there, and again, even from Bob's point of view, I know he does live radio, but to go back on and do a 3-hour live show and pull it off the way that he did, I just remember watching the whole thing and just being like really, really in awe of him doing that, because it was such a big ask. 3 hours of live TV just to, and he was pulling all of these facts out about over the years that he has this like kind of library of a mind that he can just access at any time. And he's talking to John Lennon, and it's like a different world, but you were in it for a day, and it was lovely. It was amazing. And I think it did have a massive, I think my website crashed, and then and then I saw, because we played out, and people still come up to me now at gigs and just say, we saw you on the whistle test, and it really turned us on to your music, and we've been fans ever since. So it was a massive thing. It was a huge thing for me.
From a live television special and getting to meet the great guitarist Albert Lee, can we go on to talk a bit about the songwriting process and writing lyrics? I kind of describe you as a musical storyteller, but I wanted to ask you where you kind of get your inspirations and stories for writing kind of material, and where you write, how that kind of process happens.
Well, it can happen anywhere, really. I mean, the lyrical side of things can come from a conversation that I could be having with someone, and I can jot a line down of something that somebody says. I was talking with a friend on the phone with a song that I've recently written, and strangely enough, I was playing the song to him the other night, and I was having a phone call. I was on the phone with him, and I said, we were talking about someone that we'd known years and years ago, and I said something like, you don't know the people that you know. And I went, oh, hold on. And I went and wrote that line, I just wrote it down. And he was like, I'm having it. I said, no, it's mine. I'm having that line. I'm having it. And then I played in the song the other night. I said, do you remember the phone call? And he's like, oh, yeah. And this whole song came out of one line, and so it can be anything. It can be something as simple as that, or it can be something that moves me to something that, I don't know. The last album was very much about it wasn't about taking sides or turning and trying to turn against anyone, but it was about trying to explain what I saw of the division around everyone in this town you owned was about this feeling of two camps, and those two camps are just constantly at each other and fighting each other, all of the lyrics on that album are literally about me just trying to come to terms with what I saw as almost like a kind of social media controlled situation that everyone got sucked into. It doesn't matter what you voted for or what your opinions were. Everyone just all of a sudden seemed to be at each other's throats, and I couldn't help it. Right, those lyrics kind of almost were falling out of me in poems, and just sketches of lyrics that I was writing. And so did the music. You know, it was a really that to me, that album just kind of, as I said before, sometimes where you don't really know where these things come from. It's a subconscious, it's a subconscious. You're taking it in. As far as I can gather, you're taking these things in, and they bother you and upset you, or make you laugh, or you find something fun, and then it comes out in this form of songwriting. For me, that's how I kind of tend to do it. I think I'd struggle to write a book about anything, but it seems to be a thing that it's just a snapshot of me saying something and trying to condense what I'm trying to say into 3 or 4 verses or more of a song. And so it varies, it varies for me. It can be anywhere. It can be, again, I was saying to a friend of mine that, I've got a 9-year-old boy, and when I was writing the second album, I remember I was sitting in the kitchen, and I'd be making beans on toast or what, and I'd be writing songs in between. And you think, how did you ever write a song when you were looking after it? And these things just happen. The snapshots in time when you just get an idea and you write it down, and then you take it away and you work on it. And it's a long process for me. Sometimes I'll be working on quite a few songs, and they'll all be catching each other up, and there'll be works in progress, and it's just about the editing and the finite lines and changing the line and doing this little bit here and there. So it feels like it takes forever to me, but that's just my process, and as I say before, sometimes I don't like to think about it too much, because I don't like to curse myself in the sense of however I do it. It's a fun.
Do you kind of feel that some of the songs you've written or the themes you've explored are kind of based on your own kind of life experience of growing up from a child to becoming a man, where you've lived in Liverpool, maybe, the politics that stems from there, the people you've met? Does it come from also real life experiences throughout kind of your life?
Yeah, I'd say it was all of those things. I think coming from Liverpool, it's a very politicized city, and always has been, and I'd like to think it always would be. And I think it doesn't matter where you go, you'll get an opinion, whether you want it or not. And that's good. I think that's good. It encourages you to speak out about things and to be honest about these things. And I find that honesty best in writing songs. And I suppose growing up, I'm in my 40s and I'm a songwriter, and I've kind of experienced a lot of things. I've got a 25-year-old daughter, so I was a very young dad, very young, scared dad. Yeah. And now it's okay. She's the more grown up one in the relationship now. She's more like the parent. And she was 25 the other day, and I was just thinking, how does that even happen? You know what I mean? And I suppose so a lot of the songs are about maybe that fear of knowing that fear of and not understanding it, but trying to get through it the best way that you can. As a young guy, I suppose.
Talking about songwriting, before we started recording the interview, I mentioned about songs as stories and narratives, and we spoke about some songwriters that we both liked. The kind of obvious question, what songwriters have kind of really inspired you over the years? And are there any that you'd like to work with and collaborate and write songs together?
Oh yeah, yeah. And if you can make it happen, then try. No, but obviously the likes of Neil Finn, massive, huge, huge writer for me. Just has the way of lyrical phrasing and songs that come together in the most perfect way. I think he's the best songwriter that does that kind of connection since Lennon and McCartney, really. And I know he's influenced by a lot of that stuff, but it's just the way he does that. So I remember being about 15 and listening to Woodface that came out at the time, and just being,
Crowded House, yeah.
Oh man, what an album! And with his brother Tim Finn as well, and the two of them, when they come together, it is like Lennon and McCartney. You know what I mean? It's got that, and they both got that kind of Lennon McCartney way of singing. You listen to a lot of the times when they've written a song together, and it's two voices, but it sounds like one. And they've got that Everly Brothers thing, and it's just so beautiful. So Crowded House, Neil Finn, massive. Pink Floyd were a big thing. And I think more so than anyone, I think that kind of coming together of Gilmour's lyrical and Gilmour's like kind of musical versus Waters' lyrical melody.
Mm.
The way the guitar expresses against like sometimes Waters' harsh and unforgiving lyrics about things. And that's where I think lyrically where I get my thing to be able to speak about things that affect me and others and everything around us, because Waters is so outspoken about the way that he goes about what he sees around him, and so I suppose listening to his lyrics have really inspired me to try and do that thing of saying what you need to say sometimes, with ambiguity and but also trying to put a lot of meaning into it. And he just has a way of condensing a line that can just say everything it needs to say, and it's a beautiful thing. And you've just got, sometimes I just find myself reading his lyrics and trying to work out how he's got to where he has. So I'd love Neil Finn, Roger Waters. They're two really huge writers for me in terms of that world. But there's a lot of writers out there that are great too. We were talking about Josh Rouse and you saying about the comparisons, which I've had in lots of, and he's a great song. There's a whole ton of. I could be here all day.
I wanted to move back to the kind of recording process and talk about your third and most up-to-date album, which is called This Town Your Own, which you did mention earlier on.
Yeah.
I want to talk about working with the musician and acclaimed producer, Ethan Johns. And what was it like working with Ethan? And what did you learn from the experience of working with him as a producer and actually mixing the last album?
It was brilliant. I've been a huge fan of Ethan for I suppose probably since a first heard Heartbreaker, Ryan Adams' Heartbreaker and Gold. I remember a friend of mine giving me a CDR of Heartbreaker, I think it was, and saying, you got to listen to this guy, check it out. And I listened to it and then bought the album. And then I was working in a record store. I was working in a record shop that was called, what is it called now? It'll come to me. But it was like a discount record store. It was like they were everywhere. But every album I seemed to pick up at the time that was coming out that was new, like whether it be the Kings of Leon or Ray LaMontagne or, and then obviously the continuation of Ryan Adams and all these. But there was tons of albums at that time, Paolo Nutini, all these things that were coming out that were like, thinking, Ethan Johns, I mean, they've got who's this guy, And this was kind of like 2001, 2002. Who's got, what have you got to do to work with this dude? Because he seems to be all over everything. And I didn't know his history at the time because obviously you couldn't just go on and Google someone and find out about him. So he was kind of an elusive character, but I kept seeing his name pop up on records. And then I thought, that's the Heartbreaker and Gold, Ryan Adams, that's how I would love to record an album, because you can just tell it's in the room, it's live, it's going down. mean, you even heard all the tape noises at the start, it's rolling in and all of this type of thing. I thought that's how I want to do an album. So to meet Ethan through the AMA and AMA UK, and actually really click with him. I think we did a radio interview together for the AMAs, I think in 2017.
Yeah.
Although I'd met him the year before and said hello, and he really enjoyed my performance and everything. But then it was 2017. We were on a radio show together, and I think we sat there, we talked, we had a laugh and everything. And then he said, "Do you want to go and grab a bite to eat?" And I said, "Yeah, cool." And we went around the corner from BBC, and sat and had something to eat. And he just kind of said, "I'd really like to record you one day." And I said, "I'm really going to let you." Because he's just, for me, he was one of those guys that for me, he was the sound of UK Americana. He brought that sound to so many people in this country, and he'd influenced so many musicians like myself to want to get involved in that world. So for me, he was everything. And I can't believe that they just don't give him awards every year for it. He's amazing. And it was just the process of watching him do what he does and understanding him doing what he does was amazing too. Him and there's a guy called, I've got to mention Don Monks as well, who's like his engineer, who is just a sonic genius. And what the pair of them don't know about sound isn't worth knowing. They're absolutely brilliant. It was an amazing life moment, of being in the room with those guys.
From recording and working with Ethan Johns to going out on tour, I wanted to ask you, do you enjoy touring? And how do you fill your time when you're on the road and not performing? And have you got any favorite places or venues that you've performed over the kind of many years?
Yeah. I love touring. I love being out and about. I love meeting people on the road, just like people who come to your gig and you have a chat with them afterwards and all of that. It's like, for me, it's, if somebody takes the time to come out and see your show, then it's a big thing for me. I don't take that for granted at all. I think somebody buying a ticket for your show is an amazing thing. And I have fun on stage, I try to have a laugh and play some songs and so I love it. And then, I've been to some great places. I mean, I got to play the Royal Albert Hall. That was a good one.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was a moment. But then, so gigs like that, Royal Albert Hall, I'd always wanted to play there. And James Walburn, who I mentioned before, who plays with the Pretenders, he'd sent me a message saying, "Do you want to come and support the Pretenders at the Royal Albert Hall?" And it was on April the 1st. It was like late at night on April the 1st, and I thought he was winding me up. So I sent him a rather harsh email back saying, "Yeah, whatever." And then he sent back on the next morning, "No, do you want to play?" I was like, "Yeah, okay." And then there's a great little venue that I play every year. I'm playing it soon. It's on the Wirral, just across the Mersey from here, called Thornton Hough. And I know a lot of great, like Chris Difford and people like that have come and played, and you get a lot of these you get a lot of artists like that come through and play. It's only holds about 120 people, but it's got a really nice vibe.
Yeah.
And it's one of those, I like those kind of listening rooms where people they sit and they'll listen and they take it in, and you almost just can. You just feels like you sat at home and you're just playing a few songs to people, and so those kind of venues, I love those, and I like going up to Scotland. Scotland's great. They're all bonkers and they love, and they come out to the gigs and they throw beer at you and scream, and it's brilliant. You know what I mean? And so I like going anywhere, and I've kind of been since the lockdown's lifted. I've been all over the place. I've been to the southeast, southwest, to Scotland a couple of times, and I'm happiest when I'm in the car on the way to a gig.
What about America? Have you ever performed the States?
Yeah.
What was that like? I've heard, I've spoken to some musicians who say that the vibe performing to American audience is very different to performing to, say, a British audience or a European one. And I had one musician say that they felt, as a musician, they felt more appreciated by an American audience. Like they play a really nice guitar riff that was quite complicated and get applauded and standard ovation for
I've had that where you say a certain line and they start clapping and you're like, oh, what happened? Thought the juggler had come onto stage or something. You know what I mean? But it's interesting the difference. But I always find that I've done. So I go over for like Americana Fest, which is in September, and they often have like showcases and things like that. And then I've been out and done other little gigs around that, and I've traveled with like kind of songwriting retreats. It's quite hard to go out there and just do your own thing, because it to put a tour together to go out to the States is like, it's getting harder. But it was hard before, but it's getting even harder now. I mean, financially and just even all of the red tape that you have to get through to go out and do a load of gigs. But I've played out there enough to kind of get a good vibe from people. And I think what it is, I think it comes back to what we were saying about the Stones and the Beatles and all of that type of thing before, where then they're packaging something they already know, but in a different way. So like, I think people appreciate the songs that I do, even if they have got a slightly country or Americana vibe to them, because I don't sing in an American accent. And I think that they can still hear the Britishness in there, the UK in there. And I think it gives them something that they haven't got. And I think I've always had really, really great reactions from people over there, and I love it, because as you say, they are really appreciative, and they'll come and let you know, and they'll come and talk to you afterwards, and they seem to be fairly diehard. And yeah, but I am hoping to get out there and do some proper touring at some point, but it still seems like a little crazy over there with everything going on, doesn't it, at the minute? But it's a great place to go.
The musical journey continues, and if we talk about touring and being on the road, you've worked and supported so many tremendous artists over the years, and whole list to kind of go through, from Elvis Costello, again one of the great songwriters, James Blunt, to Mary Chapin Carpenter, to Robert Plant, Duane Eddy, Paul Carrack. What have you learned musically and professionally from being in their company and playing on the same bill as some of those, tremendous list of names?
Yeah, so I mean, with the likes of Robert Plant and Elvis Costello and things like that, I've been involved with those guys through the AMA, and you get to see and experience and talk to them, and they're walking songbooks, aren't they? And they're people who have been there and done it, and they exude that, and you either soak it in, you take it in, or you don't. People like Paul Carrack I did 3 tours with Paul Carrack, just opening up for him, and he was so generous in the time that he used to give me, and it was right at the time when I put Life in Easy Steps out, and it saved me bacon really, because the album came out, and then I got the tour later in the year, about the October, and I was kicking around with nothing much to do, because I think I'd just changed my management, and I think they dropped the ball with gigs. So I was a bit like, oh, what am I? I was kind of looking at the Tesco aisles for getting a job again, or whatever. I was looking anywhere. I was thinking, what am I going to do? And then the gigs came through, and they were brilliant. I think I did like 50 odd gigs on the first tour with him, and it allowed me to be able to learn how to control and play to an audience, and because it was just acoustic, and so that was great. I mean, he gave me a van. He was, just amazing. He's an amazing guy, and actually, there's nothing that Paul Carrack can't do or play. So when you're
a beautiful singer as well, isn't he? His voice is like, he sings like an angel, doesn't he?
Yeah, and I think that again, I'd come out of like a completely different thing with playing with bands, and then I had to realign myself with becoming a singer-songwriter and singing on my own without that backup behind me. And watching Paul and watching what he used to do with his vocals, and then speaking to him beforehand, because before he'd go on stage, sometimes he'd be like, oh, I'm not feeling great or whatever. Then he'd go out and he'd absolutely smash it, and you think everyone goes through that. Even Paul Carrack goes through that. Everyone has those same worries before they go on. So you're learning all of these different, you see that they just deal with the day the same way that you do. It's no different. So you learn from those people. Like Mary Chapin Carpenter, for instance, I got up and played in the Ram with her with Ethan Johns as well, and it was at Cadogan Hall in London. And I played the new song called "The Ending" off the album. And this was just before the lockdown. It was I think it was February 2020, and I got up and played the ending with Ethan and his band, the Black Eyed Dogs, and it got a really good reception. But the one thing that I noticed was that as I walked off the stage, Mary Chapin Carpenter was stood up clapping me off the stage, and I thought,
Oh, wow.
That's a moment, you know. And then she covered the ending. She covered it on one of her Sunday sessions that she was doing from lockdown, and then we've been really friendly ever since. And I was meant to be touring with her in the UK next year in January, but she's still not feeling confident enough about touring and getting on a plane and traveling yet. So hopefully that's for the future. But so yeah, you kind of you meet all of these people, and when someone like Mary Chapin Carpenter says about one of the songs that you've written, that when she says something, and by the way, just to mention, I co-wrote that song. It's the only co-wrote I've ever done that I've put on an album. I co-wrote it with a guy called James House, who's a Nashville singer-songwriter who's written. If you would, I could go through it, but if anyone wants to Google what he's done, he's written with some amazing people, James House. And then we wrote that song on a Chris Difford songwriting retreat. But you know, for someone to take your song and cover it like Mary Chapin Carpenter is just it's a nice moment. It's not an ego trip. It's just one of those moments that you think to yourself, it's come full circle, because that's what I do with the people that I really, you know, admire as songwriters. And for a songwriter like her to do that, it's a huge thing. So yeah, all of these people, they're all just, they add some kind of other little thing into your armory, really, that you can take forwards with you.
I got one final question before we move on to the quick fire questions, which I ask all the guests who do your take. The last one is, what does the future hold for you? If you've got any musical plans and goals, and do you intend to kind of create any music outside of the kind of country, Americana and blues genres, and just do something completely different?
It's interesting you say that, because I've been having this conversation with the band, and I want to take the sound. So I sat and played about 8 or 9 songs to a friend of mine the other night. He made some dinner, and I was just sat at the kitchen table, and he was like, "Play us a couple of, you know, what have you been writing?" Okay, so I played him a few songs, and actually, it was nice for me to kind of almost play 8 or 9 new songs to someone, because I've not heard them to anyone, and to then see that there is that thread's there, you know, again. But the thread seems to be more, strangely enough, after everything that we've talked about, seems to be more UK folk, English singer-songwritery vibe. And it seemed, but the vibe that I wanted to also bring to it was like that kind of Floyd sound of moogs and keys and deeper, darker sounds. So that I'm taking away from that more high-end thing that often the Americana and country world has, you know, with fiddles and all of that type of thing. And so yeah, you're only because you asked the question so poignantly, really. Yeah, I'm trying to not purposely trying to move away, but I just think it'd be quite nice to do something different, you know, something that doesn't sound like the last album, for a start, and doesn't sound like any album I've put out before, because I think it's always nice for people to have a different view on things. And so, as I said, some of my influences are very UK. They're very, very much based in the UK singer-songwriter scene. So yeah, something like that's probably going to be the next album. I don't know how yet, but I've written most of it, and I think that's what's going to happen.
Okay, these are the final questions we asked. They're just 13 sort of quick fire questions to wrap up the interview.
How many? 13.
13.
Okay.
Okay, they're kind of just to find out things you like, things you don't like, and kind of pastimes and so on. Okay. So here we go. Number 1, Robert Vincent, what would you say is your favorite pastime?
Writing songs, moaning, and probably drinking beer. There you go.
Moaning. I spend a lot of time moaning.
Yeah, I do too. It's great.
Detrimental to the wife. She absolutely hates it. Yeah.
She loves it, really. Go on.
Next one. What's your favorite film and why?
I watched Interstellar recently. Interstellar. I think it always used to be The Shining, and I love The Shining, but Interstellar, that Kate, is it J.J. Abrams? Is it with Matthew
Chris Nolan, isn't it?
Chris Nolan, that's the fella. What a film that is, man! That makes me cry every time because if you're a parent, you know why. So you have to watch it.
Who would you say is your favorite novelist?
I read really rubbish books like Lee Child because I want something that's not gonna. If I want to read something like a poem or something, I'll go to a poet, but I don't know. So I read like kind of James Herbert and Lee Child, that type of thing. Just something that takes my mind away.
If you could have had a different profession, what would it have been?
Pole dancer.
Who in life would you say is your greatest inspiration?
My children. There you go.
Who do you read a newspaper, and if so, which one?
I haven't read a newspaper for years, and they're only fit for building fires with.
Good answer. I like that. I don't read one. Never will. What would you say is your favorite food?
Curry.
Another good choice. Who would you say is your favorite cultural icon?
Probably John Lennon, I think. So,
what is your favorite curse word and why? And you can say it, obviously.
It's probably shy talk. It doesn't get used enough. It used to get shy talk. It used to get used loads in Liverpool, but no one says it anymore. So I'm going to try to bring back shy talk. There you go.
What would you say is your favorite place or holiday destination?
Southwest Cornwall.
This is going to be a tricky one for you because you've got so many musical influences, but who is your favorite music artist and what is your favorite album?
Roger Waters and Animals by Pink Floyd.
What would you say is your greatest achievement to date?
Releasing music. I think just releasing music. I think that's it's a dream to do it.
And the final question of the interview: how do you wish to be remembered, Robert Vincent?
That 6'6" grumpy northerner who could maybe sing a song or two. That'll do.
I wouldn't say you're grumpy. Lovely way to end the interview. I've really enjoyed it. It's been so interesting.
Good.
Hearing your story and talking about the creative songwriting process as well and all your influences.
Yeah.
Always wanted to talk to you, and I've seen you, I think 3 times live now. First with Duane Eddy at the London Palladium.
We didn't talk about Duane, did we? Oh, that's amazing.
The Twang Man. Yeah.
Yeah. I've been in his house and jammed with him in Nashville. It's just an amazing, lovely, warm bloke. What a guy. But yeah, sorry.
And then I saw you with Ethan Johns. So I'd not heard of Ethan Johns until that very night, and I was so impressed by him. Yeah. Obviously yourself and his band as well.
Yeah.
And your band, who we should have mentioned as well.
Of course, yeah.
Incredible musicians. I love the guitarist as well.
Yeah, Adrian Gautry. You got Adrian Gautry, Anna Corcoran, Jim Kimberly, Danny Williams, and Robbie Taylor. They're all just fantastic guys, yeah.
And finally, to end, how do we find out more about Robert Vincent on YouTube, Facebook, and your site and so on?
Yeah, if you go to robertvincentmusic.com, there's a lovely website there, and you can just find all the links to everything that you need there. So yeah, well, thanks for the great interview as well. They're great questions, and it was really nice talking to you. And when I'm round your way, you have to come to the gig. I'll put you down. We'll have a beer.
No, I'll be paying for a ticket. I don't want a free ticket because I believe in musical artists.
You're a good man.
Getting their money, it's a hard profession as well.
Appreciate that.
Like all the digital platforms don't help as well, like Spotify. So
yeah. Well, I mean, funny enough, they do. I mean, I was at a fixed streaming thing in the Houses of Parliament with the MU last week, and that was really eye opening. I mean, these platforms that they can be used for good, you know what I mean. But at the moment, they're not, because they're not paying the artist, and we don't need to knock them, but we need to make sure that they're doing their job in terms of paying artists well. So fixed streaming, everyone, hashtag it.
Okay, we'll finish up, but thanks a lot. Thanks for your time.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thanks for your time.